Hello and welcome back to the Healthtech Pigeon podcast, where we break down the health tech news every single week. Brought to you by the SomX team. My name is Jessica and I'm joined by SomX's wonderful Amy. Welcome, Amy. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing good apart from the wildlife. There's been a lot of
No.
wildlife where I am. Lizards, frogs, a giant spider, in lots of insects and mice, and what I thought was a bear, but was actually just my brother downstairs. But still, in my head, in the middle of the night, it was a bear. So apart from that, and not sleeping very well, I'm doing well.
That's probably a device for the sleep thing, but to be honest, it sounds like a pigeon's dream, excluding the bear. I'm not sure a bear and a pigeon, I don't think the pigeon would come off that well, but the other bits I think pigeon would be pretty open to.
I forgot the bee's nest, bumblebee's nest.
Okay. Do pigeons like bees? I figured maybe not. But still,
Pigeon would be welcome in the zoo.
yeah. Well, it's nice that you're at one with nature. I'm glad that there is not a bear in your vicinity. Cool. Well, it feels like the conversation we're going to have today. I think we kind of kicked it off last week, and we got all existential, talking about AI and Black Mirror and I had to go outside and touch grass afterwards. But I can't promise that it's going to be any brighter or sunnier. Has been torrential rain here today, but I think there's been some cool developments regarding OpenAI, of course, over the last week. So, Amy, why don't you talk us through this latest story and this latest development, and we will get into the detail.
It does follow on from what we were saying, and in our last discussion, we talked about what is that turning point of repercussions. We're talking about using ChatGPT for mental health and the lack of regulation there. Now, there was a young lad in California who took his life after speaking to ChatGPT, and the couple, the parents, are now actually suing OpenAI over the death of their teenage son, and they're alleging that ChatGPT it actually encouraged him to take his own life. So the lawsuit has gone to the Superior Court, and it's actually the first legal action that is accusing OpenAI of wrongful death. So here we have that kind of turning point of accountability, and it's happening. It's really sad that it's come to this point of the death of somebody, but I think it's a really important kind of moment where we look at who is responsible, and how are we going to move forward from it. And that the parents are calling for obviously tighter regulations so that this kind of incident never ever happens again. And I think that's probably what everybody would want, but how and when that's going to happen is very unclear. And even if it can happen, there's another story out this week about that Stanford have done a study on ChatGPT as well, and people using that for mental health. And some mental health psychotherapists are alluding that ChatGPT is actually the most widely used mental health tool in the world, which is amazing considering it wasn't built for that purpose. So, I wonder how OpenAI are feeling about this area, whether it's something they would have predicted that this tool would have been used for. Did anybody sort of have the foresight for that? I'm not sure. And also then, the main question of how exactly are they going to combat this? And Jessica, I know you mentioned earlier that they are looking into hiring somebody at OpenAI that has health tech expertise. So perhaps there's a signal there that this is moving towards more of a regulated situation for healthcare, but we're still very much in the weeds of not knowing how to tackle this quite widespread problem as well, where people are getting bad advice, or harmful, it's not even bad advice, harmful and fatal, potentially, advice from ChatGPT. So
Mm,
yeah, it's obviously devastating to read about, but at the same time, I think it's an important moment. It's an important moment for looking at AI in healthcare, the development of AI tools being used for things that we don't predict as well, um,
mm.
and and also the piece on regulations and how we're gonna come around from it.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, and it kind of like it summarizes quite a few of the conversations we've had on this podcast quite recently. And I think going back several weeks to the conversation with Benedict from Sanum, where I think we asked the question quite directly, like, or we were talking about the fact that ultimately there is a human cost here, and that what is it going to take for people to sit up and take notice. And I think the reality is that this is an incredibly sad story where this young boy has taken his life, but he's not the only one. We know that there are cases out there, that get talked about in the broad, and also that we also don't know about. This is the first time that we've seen uh, it come to a legal case, it be brought to court. And I think we talked also about incentives, and one of the incentives that we're already clear on for big corporations is obviously share price. Now, I don't know how this has affected share price for them, or whether it even has. It may not have. What I can guarantee, though, is that if there's going to be this continued spotlight on the outcome of a legal proceeding, that will at some point affect their share price to some extent. But I think, this is a really important moment because it's the first time that, as far as I'm aware, and from what we've read, that this really devastating loss of life is being brought into the courts, and OpenAI are being challenged on that. And I think what we will watch play out could potentially, depending on the outcome, set case law for how for the responsibilities of big tech and corporations in the consequences of how their technology is used, even if they would argue that that isn't its intended use. Now, we can come on to talk about, some of those aspirations and those hires that they've made in a moment. But the fact is, it exists as, similar to Google, I suppose, like a search engine. It's a knowledge base. It's a valuable tool. Its intention is not as a therapeutic device, and yet it is. And I think, off the back of, hopefully, we see a positive action off the back of the legal outcome here, which will put some mandates in place which go over and above, the action that they've said they'll take previously, which is putting up warnings. Because it sounds to me, from reading the story, based on the responses of ChatGPT to this person as they're in their darkest moments, it needs more than a warning to say you might be having a tough time. Here's a a helpline you can call, or just, it might be time to step away. It needs some kind of check and balance or intervention that prevents ChatGPT and others, whether it's Claude or Gemini, and we don't actually hear so much of people using those platforms in such a way. I think because ChatGPT is just almost used as an umbrella term for so many of them. But um, there has to be safeguards in place that no matter what someone's talking about, that they are protected, and that ChatGPT, whatever other platform, is not going to exacerbate that situation, and encourage fatal consequences. And I understand people have concerns about censorship, and all of that kind of thing. But I think that there's definitely a difference between censorship and safeguards, and a platform that is perpetuating and encouraging an individual to harm themselves and arguably complicit in that, in that harm. And I guess that raises another question as well when we talk about intelligent technologies and like responsibility, that, if ChatGPT has been operating of its own free will, I don't know if people would say that, but it like, I think we'll reach a point in time where, like, obviously you have the creators, the developers, the companies who've built these technologies, but if they're considered a life force in and of themselves, where's the culpability then? I don't know. Maybe that's
Mm,
like me extrapolating to some like dystopian existential threat that we'll never get to. But people talk to it like it's a real person, and
mm.
we've talked about the fact that they have relationships with these platforms, to devastating effect.
Do you think you can have the good without the bad, though? Because I mean, I'm saying this as a kind of, contentious question, because I'd like to say yes, and that's where regulations are at their finest. But with as you said, with ChatGPT, with chatbots, with the kind of the reason that they're so great is that ability for that kind of human relationship type experience that you get, the information, the knowledge. Um, how do we strike that balance where they're still offering the value that people clearly
Mm,
get from the
yeah.
platform while protecting people? Is it that there are always going to be risks and we have to mitigate them? Is it the fact that it's so widespread and therefore it's purely a numbers game? If that many people are using it, there are going
Mm,
to be fatalities. Like if that many people are taking flights, there are going to be like fatalities, and that's a really sort of pessimistic view to take. But I just, we have to sort of, I guess, be realistic about the fact that um, there are benefits of the technology, which I think also lend itself to the negatives. And I just don't, I don't see a clear route. I'm not a regulations expert, but I don't see a clear route of how exactly they are going to combat all of the issues that arise from it.
mm,
But I would love to see, yeah, more transparency and trying at least.
mm. I guess the numbers thing is interesting, isn't it? Because like we work in healthcare, and no loss of life is acceptable. And I but also I think if you extrapolate that out, we know that things go wrong, and that does have human consequence, and there are tolerances of what's acceptable or not acceptable, but like what we're willing to accept, um before we start an intervention. The issue I think here though is that, um so it's really difficult to quantify how many people are using it for mental health support. You could do a sample of people, and maybe get an indication, but unless OpenAI were willing to share that data around the number of conversations that are had that relate to mental health, and then how would you also categorize that? Because if someone's doing it to talk to using it almost as a friend, to combat loneliness, would you consider that, linked to mental health, or would that be a social thing? Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
I think how you measure that is really difficult, and I think we spoke about it previously when we were talking about the separately, like, measuring impact of an AI and generative AI at, a commercial level. We haven't cracked exactly how we do that, and I think part of the issue is behind all of this black box. It's really hard to extrapolate that, and I don't think that the corporations are going to be front-footed in volunteering that information. The other thing, and it's an intro, I think it's good to have debate, right? And it's good to raise, be devil's advocate. when you say, what is acceptable, do we just accept that that is the case? I think in if you so say forget that this is ChatGPT. Say that you have, I'm trying to think of a good example, but you had a a an app that was built specifically for mental health, um, and it goes through all its regulatory, or maybe it doesn't, but it's being yeah, it's gone through the regulatory processes to, and at it has the appropriate level of certification, and um people die. People have people have taken their lives having used that. Would that be okay? The answer is no. That company would get shut down. And so it it feels it feels like, ChatGPT exists in a bit of a loophole because that's not its intended purpose. And so I think it's escaping. I don't know if it's escaping the heat. It's escaping the legal and regulatory heat because it's not clear where it sits from that perspective and who's going to hold them accountable. And coming back to the top of the story, if there's a legal case, then maybe that's what helps to keep it accountable and sets a standard. I think you mentioned earlier about some hires that they've made. So they have recently hired a guy called Daniel Etra, who is ex Instagram, but more interestingly than that, he's ex Doximity, which is a online community for healthcare professionals. It's a professional medical network. So it's a bit like LinkedIn for healthcare professionals, as I understand it. And so what they have done is they've proactively brought in somebody with healthcare expertise, which I think is a really strong signal that they are more intentionally moving into a they're moving into healthcare more intentionally. And I think you would expect with that there has to come other hires behind that which allow for that regulatory piece. I don't see that they can just move into healthcare with free reign, whether that's direct to consumer, whether that's an enterprise. And my suspicion is it's going to be like right across the spectrum. um I don't think that they can make that move without having all the pieces in play that need to be, especially at a time when they're under the spotlight with a legal case such as this. And I think I would expect to see more legal cases too. So if they're going to be intentional about here's what we do for health and healthcare, I do think there are going to be people who stand up and say, okay, cool. Well, prove how you're going to do it safely. I think as soon as they officially say this is what we do for health, then that 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 makes it an imperative for them to address some of these issues and not all of them. And maybe this is a start of that shift. Like kind of in the early days, and we only hear about the big head honcho hires. We don't hear about the teams that come in behind them, particularly when companies explore new verticals and that kind of thing. But I would expect to see follow up that shows that they are doing some of this thinking, at least doing the thinking, because I just don't see how like the heat is going to be on them.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, I don't think this is going to be the first case because even in that piece, there was another mention of somebody else who'd experienced the same problem and same issue of that kind of confirming those suicidal thoughts, and it's something that has been brought up in the media before. So the legal cases are coming, and yeah, it's. I really, really hope that they are going to kind of push forward in this area, make it more transparent, make it safer, make it safe as safe as we can. So yeah, it's an evolving and, like, I think a very important point right now in this kind of legal action and accountability, and we'll have to see how it kind of unfolds with the new health tech focus, maybe products, um, and see exactly how they're going to put the guardrails up.
Mm,
They've spoken before. We've talked on Pigeon before about recently they were mentioning the kind of guardrails, and I think you alluded to that
mm,
earlier. Messages and alerts that can tell people if they've been spending too long on the platform. But yeah, does that feel safe enough? I don't think so. So yeah, like, hopefully this will supercharge that process.
mm,
It will massively speed up the process of getting the safety
mm.
safety net there for people.
Mm. Do you know what though? I actually think, yeah, I did say it at the top of the podcast, like, oh, it's a bit doom and gloom, can't promise you anymore. And I don't want to bore people by having the same conversations every week. And I think this is a story that continues to unfold, and that's why I think it's interesting to follow it and talk about what this means and extrapolate. I guess the consequences broadly, but also in the space we work in. But I think this is an optimistic story here. It is so deeply upsetting to hear, these people who have taken their lives and lost their lives, and that is just horrendous to hear. But what I'm seeing and hopeful for is that it's presenting an opportunity that not through something really awful, there is a moment in time that helps to shift things in the direction that it needs to. And I think if the signals are as we see them, potentially it means they are moving in the right direction. There's a lot of assumptions baked into that statement. I completely appreciate it. I don't think you can say, well, they've hired someone who's worked in health tech, they must be taking this seriously, of course they're going to do regulation and get it right. um I don't think we can categorically say that, but I want to be optimistic here, because I think we've asked these hard questions about, like, where's the accountability, what's the incentive, um and we haven't had any clear answers, but I want to take confidence and some optimism in things that would appear to potentially move us in the right direction. And yeah, I think it's a deeply sad story where there is loss of life on that real, human level. But I th- I feel like it's within grasp that there's something good on the horizon. Um, but there has to be, right?
I think so as well, and I think even as you spoke at the beginning, I feel like, it's a new technology. It's
Mm,
pretty new. It only came out a couple of years ago. There's been a lot of teething issues as it rolled out. There was,
mm,
like, I mean, we couldn't possibly count the amount of, stories and contentious issues that this has brought up. But at the same time, it has provided a bit of a shake up of the way that we interact with AI, and that has been a very interesting kind of discourse to witness in the media and generally with people, and how it's changed our lives. And these things are never going to be as smooth, and as you say, obviously loss of life is the worst thing that can happen along the way. But as we've had such a momentous kind of shift in the way that we interact with AI, on a widespread level, I think there is going to be bumpy along the way, but I do think that there is a road to that kind of more peaceful harmony from this. And I actually remember when ChatGPT came out, and I was working with one of the professors who actually wrote the algorithms that power ChatGPT, and
whoa, that's
yeah,
pretty epic. God,
he
what a flex.
he and he's an incredibly interesting man, Professor Jürgen Schmidt-Huber, and we were obviously supporting him with commenting at the time because nobody knew what was going on. Everyone had so many questions, and he was
Mm,
someone that could give this perspective of looking kind of back at history and looking
mm,
forward as well, and what does he think about the future of AI, and where is it going, and should we be worried, and should we be scared? And at the time, the big tech companies were signing the petition to kind of slow down the progress of AI, and he wasn't on board with that for various
mm,
reasons. But one of some really interesting things he said was about, the it's still in its infancy, even though
yeah.
we are getting to the level of super intelligent AI is coming, it's around the corner, but it's still in its infancy. And at the end of the day, AI is not there to harm us, and he really sees a future where we are living in harmony, and it's really benefiting humans, and was so positive about that. So I think there's a lot of hope, and it's important to counter the kind of negative like rhetoric we see, but obviously we have to discuss that. But there is a road. I want to see that vision too, of like this harmonious relationship that we have with AI, where the AI's interest in the end is not going to be to harm humans, and
Mm,
it won't. That's not what it's designed, or will be its purpose. Um, so yeah, I think there's a positive future ahead we can look at, and it's just there's going to be a little bumps along the way, I reckon.
I just want to really quickly argue against myself, because I love that, and I do think ultimately it's an a utopian optimistic picture. I was just like remonstrating with myself internally as you were speaking, thinking that things like MedPalm exist, right? Which is Google moving into healthcare with generative AI and that kind of thing, and that's not FDA approved. So I guess to temper my optimism, um I do still think that it's some positive signals will continue to follow the story. However, we also know that there are platforms that exist out there that have been created by big tech that still also don't have FDA approval or, any other regulatory approval that is required within healthcare in order for it to be a medical device, which ultimately is how they're being used. And so I think to counter my optimism, there are clearly ways and means and loopholes, which mean that companies can create these platforms, and its intent can almost be unspoken. I'm sure in many ways it is spoken, but they still haven't had to go through those processes. So um, maybe the duality of this legal case, hopefully it carries the weight that it deserves, along with clearly some intentions. It sets us in the right direction, but I think we also have to be pragmatic about the fact that um, money speaks, and I think these big tech corporations have that by the bucket load, and sometimes that works in their favor. But we'll see. Anyway, I'm arguing against myself, and I don't want to
Yeah.
keep banging on about it and toing and froing. I want to be optimistic about it. I really do.
Yeah. No, it's always really difficult in these conversations, like as I'm speaking and then you speak and I come and then I'm questioning. But it is new, it's completely nuanced, and it's we go back and forth, and I think our conversation actually, it's a reflection of this kind of discourse,
Mm,
probably, of which a lot of people
mm,
feel, of this, I want to be optimistic, but I'm kind of scared, and there's repercussions. And I think it's just reflective of actually where we
mm.
are right now. And yeah, it's not clear cut. So
No,
yeah, don't beat yourself
it's
up too
not.
much.
Well, I mean, we still got more stories to chat through today, but tune in next week if you want to see how our thinking has evolved in the next 7 days. Although Amy is going to be in Bali, so I'm sure it's going to be front of mind. She's going to come back having solved all of this, by the way, because she's just going to have a really spiritual experience and come back totally enlightened about where we're going wrong with generative AI and how we can save the world.
You know what? Stranger things have happened. I might come back with an
Yeah,
epiphany to share. So
yeah.
we shall see.
I won't ask what you're doing in Bali that may provide such enlightenment, but
It's
um,
probably another podcast for
no,
that.
no, yeah, different podcast, maybe different bird, avian species. Anyway, moving on to our second story. Basically, we have seen across, well, it's big news that Eli Lilly have hiked the prices for Mounjaro. Um, now, this is slightly tactical because I do actually want to talk about this, but this isn't the story I want to talk about. Um, I want to talk about Serena Williams and how it pertains to health tech because I think it's really important and interesting. Um, but it starts with this price hike. So that's how we're going to get there. It starts with this price hike. So Eli Lilly are increasing the list price of Mounjaro by as much as 170% by people who are paying privately. And that's the crucial thing, paying privately in the UK on the basis that apparently in the UK, private payers have been paying way below the rate of our friends in Europe. And so that is set to redress that balance. Now, I guess the pricing of medicines is never as clear cut as, this country is paying this amount, or like this is the list price and uh, everyone gets a discount. Like it's just not that transparent. So there's um there's a lot of controversy. I think people are asking why is that the real reason those prices have been hiked? Is it is it just opportunistic because of the number of people who are now taking it and want to continue taking it? There's also a conversation about whether or not um so the NHS will have preferential prices compared to the private market, which will be lower than the private market. And so there's been questions asked about whether or not this price hike from a private perspective is to redress that balance and essentially subsidize NHS use of the medicine. Um, I guess we'll never know. And no one's gonna explicitly say that. But potentially you're in a situation where, yeah, you've got private payers subsidizing people who take it on the NHS. And my understanding is that the NHS prescriptions, the numbers are much lower than the people who are accessing it privately. And I think these weight loss medications are a big story. Again, it's one that keeps rolling. There's new facets to it seemingly every day, but it's one that's also so deeply ingrained into society and culture, and there's such heritage in this conversation around weight loss and so many social factors to it, um, it is so interesting. And I think how that pertains to health tech is, you know, you have obviously the traditional private payer market, which has always existed for people to access and for people to access medications through. What increasingly we're seeing is people not necessarily going to a private clinic per se. So they're not going to, the the clinic on Harley Street to receive their prescription. Some people are. Lots of people are accessing it online through either something like a Boots or a super drug where they're able to go through technically what's an online clinical consultation, but fill in a form essentially, um, or they're accessing it through like a platform provider, like a health tech provider. So, there's the Junipers, there's so many of them. I can't even think of them all anymore. We spoke to Laura from Reset quite recently, on their how they're approaching it to do it in a way that is uh appropriate and genuinely supportive to people and giving them the service and clinical input that they require. Um, there's Newman, there's Manual. There's so many of these companies that are providing a weight loss service with injectable medications, um, and it feels like it all just feels a bit messy, um, because I don't know why it feels messy. Maybe it's because it's a really divisive conversation, and I think I know it is a divisive conversation, and the reason it's divisive is because there is clearly a clinical need, for people who fit the indication, for these kinds of medications, and it is undeniable the transformative impact that that can have on somebody's life, and that is really incredible, and I think that's really, really exciting. And you want you want to make sure that those people are getting the right clinical support, because there's lots that we don't know and understand about long-term use, and how to lots of people don't have the right support to be able to titrate down or come off the medication, and there's lots of questions about whether or not this could be a lifelong medication. Um, and then you have the other side of the coin, which is the Kardashian side of the coin. So we know that these medications are really popular in celebrity culture, and we see celebrities dropping weight very, very quickly, and lots of celebrities are always under the spotlight for how their body's changing and how they look, and lots of people making assumptions about how they may be using weight loss medications to lose the weight. And I think what we have seen in the last week, 2 weeks, Serena Williams, who is arguably one of the, if not the greatest female athlete of all time, who has, relatively recently retired from professional tennis, come out and actively promoting, not just telling people that she's taken weight loss medications, but actively promoting weight loss medications and the service. And part of the reason for that is because her husband and family office have invested in a platform that helps with the dispense and support for these weight loss medications. So I got there in the end. But it's all intertwined, isn't it? And I think I find the whole thing really fascinating, and watching the conversation play out. I don't know what your take is on it, Amy.
Yeah, I think divisive is a good word. I feel it's really hard not to inject your own inject. It's really, I can't even stop myself.
Omicron.
It's, it's really hard not to place your own opinions on it, because we naturally, like, weight loss is always a personal kind of experience for each individual, and so it's really hard not to kind of put your own opinions and thoughts about whether you are on weight loss, or whether for people who are, your family is, or whether it's something you're considering, or whether it's something you would never consider and you really disagree with it. Or I don't think you can disagree with that, like, as a completely
Mm,
wide concept, but disagree with some of the ways that it's been used.
mm,
So yeah, I find it incredibly divisive and quite tricky to talk about and actually decipher my feelings on it as well.
mm,
I think, like, broadly, like when you were speaking, I think the one thing I can kind of come back to as a core is we need to make sure that the people who most need the medication get it.
Mm,
Um, there are obviously different routes to that across
mm,
different parts of the healthcare system. Um, NHS, private, um, and and finding a way where really we are getting it to the people that most need it. The price differences, there's been some criticism, obviously, that the price hikes would potentially increase the gap, or make it
mm,
more difficult for people to purchase it who it
mm,
might just be a little bit out of their budget now, um,
mm,
and they might well very need the medication.
mm,
And as you mentioned, the NHS guidelines are a little bit stricter. However, I mean, and the NHS has its own complications with kind of supply and demand,
mm,
in terms of the service and offering that. Um, but maybe there's a reason why the NHS guidelines are stricter, and it's really built for those people that are severely in need of the medication. But having said that, there's also the flip side of it. Even if you're not looking at weight loss injections as a purely kind of medical sort of urgent intervention, it can improve people's lives, and that shouldn't be taken away from people. Um, but then there's money, and there's corporations involved. So, you know, um, as you mentioned, Serena Williams, like her family with shares in the company, it that disappoints me. That story, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's fine, and maybe it's okay. But I just I find it difficult to strike this balance of, when something like this is a built for need, and then it moves into a kind of trend. And
mm.
but I guess you could kind of say the same for like a lot of like longevity style health tech medicine devices. We're kind of moving into this, um you know are we moving away from treating to just sort of improving our lives? And then there's a kind of
Mm,
sliding scale within that of treating like very very bad disease to making yourself feel good. And that also is important. But then again, there's repercussions of that big, like, more widely on society, as we know, with
what's wrong with
stigma.
feeling good though? What because I think
Nothing.
yeah, what's wrong with
Nothing.
feeling good?
Nothing's wrong with feeling good. But I guess the question is, why is it you're feeling good? And are you feeling good because you've lost weight and that's a trend? Or are you actually feeling good because you're fitter, you're stronger, you're healthier,
Mm,
you're more in tune with yourself, you feel more yourself? Or are you just, you're feeling good because you're like, I look more like people that I see online?
mm,
But maybe that's also valid. I mean, if people but then there's a really kind of dark flip side of this that we've kind of seen in history, especially with, it's not even just females, but body image and ultra skinny models where they're clearly not well, not
mm,
healthy. And
mm,
that's also economically, if we're talking about health economics, not going to be beneficial, because
mm,
people are going to be more ill. There might be then more mental health support required, a much larger degree of mental health support required, which is already completely straining our NHS system. And people are resorting to, as we've just discussed,
mm,
chatbots, because they're what's the other option, and
mm,
we're faced with so many pressures and ways that we feel like we have to be. And
mm.
so yeah, there's a bit of a side of that. But yeah, I mean, that was a real kind of up and down answer to your question, but I,
I think the feeling good thing is really interesting, right? Because I can speak to this. I say from personal experience, I'm not taking weight loss medications. I don't think I need to. I don't fit the clinical indication. I'm breastfeeding child, so utterly inappropriate. But speaking tangentially from personal experience of people I know who have taken it that do fit into a category of people who will benefit, part of part of feeling like you look good is a health benefit. So I think when they've been in that situation where they're experiencing health issues and in multiple different domains, and then they, to your point, they, part of it is that they feel fitter, they feel stronger, they ache less, their body feels like it's functioning better, the noise in their head is dulled, and yeah, they have more confidence because they feel like they look better. That's a great thing. That's such a good thing. And I think that that's a real privilege, and I've seen firsthand how transformative that can be on people's lives. And I'm talking from people who, as I say, fit the category where it would be clinically indicated. I think that the difficult thing with Serena Williams, I've seen a lot of discourse on this, and I think some people have said, I have no issue with the fact that she's taking it. And ultimately, no one should have an issue with anyone's decisions they're making about their own body. Some people will be judgmental about Botox, but like for the most part, Botox is pretty well accepted, and no one, is being, people are getting, harangued for it. But that's a lot more acceptable, right, than weight loss medication for lots of different reasons. I'm being glib here, but like, there certainly shouldn't be judgment for a decision that she's made, and she's at a different point in her career and her life now than she was when she was playing professional tennis. The other part of it is that, you know, isn't that a great example of someone who is like arguably one of the greatest athletes of all time, and yet still struggles with being able to optimally manage their body, um and making that okay for people. um uh, I'm not doing the conversation the service that it deserves, but I think everyone's lots of people are very triggered by it, and there's so much societally, culturally, and many other factors, I think, that come into play here. I think it's the I think for some people, it's the promotion of it that is making it uncomfortable. But to come full circle, so you said it's really difficult to get on the NHS. Often, new medications or like there are some medications that are really expensive, that mean that there are checks in place that mean that it is harder to access. You have to try different medications before you get prescribed that. I think by being able to access it through a private provider, it lowers the bar. And for one of the first times we've seen people pay out of pocket to people who would never normally pay out of pocket for medication, they've been able to access that.
Do you think I think the thing with the Serena story, why I think it has caused debate is because of what Serena Williams symbolizes for people. And um, obviously, this will be different, but in a general sense, she symbolizes, as you said, she's one of the most acclaimed athletes. She's a powerful female figure. She has that incredibly successful career. There's a real sense of kind of power and feminine energy and other aspects of her that she symbolized. And I think this it just not that you and maybe there's work to be done on that discourse, that you can take you can take weight loss medications and still be that. And maybe that's where the problem lies in the kind of debate.
Mm,
It's that it's stigma.
mm,
It shouldn't be such a stigma. It should be like any other medication that we take, but should it? And I guess that's the question. You know, I I think we've seen a huge benefit in society from it. And as you said, it makes you feel good. And if people feel good, there's nothing wrong with that. And the conversations that we have around this, I think is only going to be one way that we kind of break some of that down, break some of that stigma down, and make it, more of a normal thing. But
But
yeah,
arguably, Serena Williams coming out and doing this is making it more normal. And I think for people who again fit into the category where they can benefit from it, there must be something really empowering about seeing arguably the greatest athlete in the world coming out and saying, I've done all of these things and even I struggle. And I mean, agenda aside, okay, she's got a stake in this, but if I were to liken it to trusted platforms over here that I know provide the clinical support that people need to be able to thrive through the journey with these medications, it's showing that here's how I did it, and here's a trust is a difficult thing when there's money involved, I guess. She can't. I don't think she could really say I trust these people when she's ultimately getting paid. But do you know what I mean? It's advocating for here's another route and here's a way to do it safely, and maybe it's a role model for that rather than them like people slipping into the discourse that even Serena's taking it, even she feels the pressure to conform to this idealistic beauty standard. Maybe it's not about that. Maybe it's about showing people that you can be the greatest athlete in the world and need still need help to be your healthiest self. And let's not forget, she's in a different season of her life. She doesn't need her body will naturally be changing, and it doesn't need to function and be as it was when she was at the height of her professional career. So I think it's so interesting. There's so many connotations to this and so many conversations that can and should be had around it. I just find it so interesting that it's not Serena working with Eli Lilly, it's Serena working with a health tech provider. And I think we've probably years ago now talked about she's invested in several different health tech companies, so she's been in and around this space for a while. But this is pretty punchy, and an interesting way. As I said, she could have teamed up with anyone, but she didn't. She chose to work with a provider and a health tech provider, and I think that's interesting. And I think it's just another story that's going to continue to unfold. It's like an onion; it has many layers that need to be peeled back. And in time, maybe there's a lot we don't know and understand. But again, like from a positive perspective, I would like to think that something like that, whilst it feels uncomfortable and clunky, maybe it opens up a door to people who would benefit to be able to consider something like that, and realize that I'm not I'm not lazy, or like there's not something wrong with me even though I've been trying. There is another option that I can try, and it's not the cheat way out. It's a legitimate way of improving my quality of life. All right, well, there's some big conversations for this week that don't end here, and I really hope that we've taken on a bit of a journey. We've shared a bit more about some of the conversations we're a part of and that we're hearing daily. Things move so fast, and it's good to be able to talk about them. And I guess let's see where we end up for next week. And yeah, I was going to say I haven't seen Serena come out and issue any statement off the back of the criticism, and I don't necessarily think she should. Maybe she shouldn't. But it'd be interesting to know what her response is, and maybe that will come in time. But what I will say is we've made it to the end of the episode and haven't even managed to weave in Taylor Swift's engagement and make that health tech. So maybe we'll leave that for next week. That sounds like a challenge that. Oh, okay. That's a challenge we can take on. Take Taylor Swift's engagement and make it health tech. Because I feel like that's got to be a happy story. There's got to be something in that.
I like the sound of that. So yeah, I'm up for that, Jess. And I think I need to go and touch some grass now because
Yeah.
we've really covered a lot of ground.
We've got a lot of ground in the big and important topics. But I mean, you say you're going to touch grass, go to Bali, have your spiritual enlightenment and report back. And in the meantime, we'll be carrying on the health tech conversation right here.
Amazing. All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.